In our last two lectures, we have explored the world of the Iliad. We have examined the characters of Agamemnon and Achilles and the historical kernel which lies behind the Iliad. In this lecture, we look at the Odyssey. Now, in our last lecture, we dealt with the question of what makes a great book. And I gave you a set of criteria. A great book must deal with a noble theme. It must be written in noble, elevated language. It must speak across the ages. It must be universal. And both the Odyssey and the Iliad fulfill these criteria. The Odyssey is the counterpart of the Iliad. And in antiquity, both were attributed to the creative genius of Homer. Both are poems, epic poems, that are structurally identical in terms of their meter and their use of formulas like cloud-gathering Zeus or Hector of the flashing helm. And with regard to story, the Odyssey is the sequel to the Iliad. But they are very different in spirit. The theme of the Iliad is war and honor. There is a fairy tale quality to the Odyssey. It is a tale certainly of vengeance, but it is a story in which everything turns out well in the end. The Iliad ends with the death of Hector. Like life, it must end in death. But Odysseus is reconciled even with the descendants of those he has had to take vengeance upon. And the goddess Athena appears and with the thunderbolt of Zeus says, "Enough of vengeance." They are also very different, the Iliad and the Odyssey, in terms of their central characters. Achilles lives in a world in which honor is all important. Pride and honor are certainly part of the character of Odysseus. But Odysseus is also a survivor. Achilles made the choice to die young and leave behind a tale of glory. Odysseus makes the choice, certainly to be remembered, but above all, to survive. Odysseus is the man of many wiles. That is how he is described. Crafty, deceitful. These are terms that are used to describe him, and he is not ashamed of them. In fact, he would not be ashamed of one of the best definitions of him as a man who knew how to tell many lies and to tell them well. And it is this ability to deceive, his courage under pressure, that will bring him through the long and difficult trials that are set for him. For the siege and capture of Troy did not mean the end of difficulties for the Greeks. In fact, at the very moment of their triumph, they committed the sin of hubris, that outrageous arrogance. They tore away from the very altar of the gods, the prophetess Cassandra, the daughter of King Priam of Troy, the one who had once been the beloved of Apollo and cursed by her when she spurned his advances. She was always the prophetess, always telling the truth, but no one believed her. And so she was taken by the Greeks and made the mistress of great Agamemnon. But it was sworn by the gods and goddesses, even Athena, that the homecoming of the Greeks would be difficult. Few indeed were those who came home easily. Menelaus would wander long in Egypt. Agamemnon himself would come home quickly and to glory, only to be murdered by his wife and her lover. But most of all, Odysseus would suffer. For 10 years, as long as it took to besiege Troy, for 10 more years, Odysseus would roam, hated by the god Poseidon, driven from shore to shore, until not a single one of his companions, not a single one of the men he had led out from Ithaca was alive, only Odysseus surviving. That is how the story begins. Odysseus has wandered, and the gods and goddesses have come together in assembly in Olympus. And the question is raised by Athena, the constant friend and companion at the divine level of Odysseus. Why can't he go home? And Zeus says, I think he ought to go home, but you know Poseidon is still angry at him. Poseidon is angry for what Odysseus did to his son, the Cyclops, blinding him. But Poseidon is away visiting the Ethiopians at a banquet. And so let us let Odysseus go home. And then we are immediately transported, not to the island of Calypso, the beautiful nymph in whose company Odysseus is, but rather back to Ithaca, back to the palace of Odysseus, back to his son Telemachus on the verge of manhood, and the beautiful, dutiful wife of Odysseus, Penelope. For there at Ithaca, in the long absence of Odysseus, greedy nobles have infested his palace. They pay court to Penelope, begging her over and over again to marry them, eager to enter into the estate of Odysseus, treating with contempt his son Telemachus, and eating up all his food and drinking up his wine, telling her, that Penelope, that Odysseus must be dead. And our first glimpses of the character of Odysseus come through others. For his son, urged on by Athena, goes off to learn about where his father is. He goes to the palace of Nestor and then on to Sparta to meet with King Menelaus. And from these companions of Odysseus in the trials of the Trojan War, we learn of his bravery, of his ability to react under pressure, and we meet the wonderful scene of Menelaus and Helen, because Helen has survived. The Trojan women have been led off into slavery. Troy has been burned. Hector is dead. But Helen survives. Her husband thought about killing her when he took her captive, but her beauty was such, he brought her home. So we learn in the Odyssey that perhaps bad acts don't always have immediate consequences. Helen is another survivor. She is still beautiful, and she immediately recognizes that this young man must be Telemachus. He looks so much like his father. And she describes the might of Odysseus, his ability always to solve situations. And Menelaus pays the highest tribute to Odysseus. He says, he also has courage in desperate times, not just on the field of battle, but he's cool in head. I tell you what, we were in the wooden horse, and Helen, my wife, was going around the wooden horse, speaking in the voices of different ones of our wives. I don't know why you did that, dear. Oh, they made me do it. That's why I see. Well, at any rate, she was doing that because, I know you wanted us to win. That's right, I did. But at any rate, she was calling out in these names, and several of the men wanted to bolt. That must be my wife down there. She must somehow be a captive. And Odysseus alone kept us cool and ready for the moment of action. So you know Odysseus is a man that you would want with you. So we see Odysseus revealed through the eyes of his son. And then we are finally put face to face with Odysseus. He is on the island of Calypso, and she wants him to stay. He has been there with her for 7 years. He sleeps with her, but by day he sits by the sea and weeps. He wants to go home. He wants to return. And the god Hermes is sent down to bring the message to Calypso. He must be allowed to go home. And so she builds him a raft. But Odysseus never trusts anyone. That is part of the reason he survives. And he is not sure that she has not become mad at him and somehow going to drown him. And so he works on the raft himself and makes sure that it is seaworthy, and then sets sail, leaving behind Calypso and getting almost to Ithaca, his beloved homeland. He can discern its mountains, smoke rising up for him in its farmhouses, when suddenly Poseidon is there. He's come back from his banquet. He is outraged and sends this storm. And Odysseus is dashed from his raft and washed up on a faraway island. But he never loses his spirit. He always perseveres, finds himself a little cuddly bed under leaves, and the next day sees the beautiful princess of the island, Nausicaa, daughter of the king, come to wash her clothes, presents himself, and is taken back to the great hall of the king. And there, recites his magnificent story, all the tales and adventures that he has had, sings them to the accompaniment of a lyre, sings them in the great hallway, just like the hallways we saw in Mycenae and at Troy, and entertains in his most pregnant moment. For it is upon the value of his story, his ability to win the trust of the Phaeacians and their king, that his chance to return home rests. And so he tells them, they have heard of Odysseus. They have heard of all the sufferings of the men who fought at Troy. And he tells how once the city had been taken, he had his chance to get back home. But he went back to stay with his comrades. And then led his men on an expedition to the land of the Ciconians. This is historical. A place in Thrace. They raid it, they plunder it, they take away the goods that they want, they kill the men in battle. But from then on, Odysseus leaves the historical map, geographical certainty, and takes his audience and us through a fairy tale land. First to the land of the lotus eaters, where his men who are sent forth to explore the territory on a reconnaissance mission find these magnificent fruits that if you eat of them, you lose all memory and never want to go home. And he has to jerk his men back to reality, the land of the lotus eaters. We think of Egyptian frescoes holding lotus blossoms up to their nose. And we think of the strong trade that went on between Egypt and Mycenaean Greece in the very age of Odysseus. And we wonder if we're still in the historical world. And then to a land that makes us more skeptical. A beautiful island, land, the ship rests in the harbor, and Odysseus, with a small number of his men, crosses across to a larger island and to a cave. And they enter the cave, and it's filled with cheese and milk in great pails. And they see the inhabitants of the island, gigantic figures. They are, in fact, the Cyclops, who fear not even Zeus himself. And there in the cave, Odysseus and his band of men are when one of the Cyclops, Polyphemus, comes in. And the question he asks is typical of the age. Are you pirates? Not necessarily that it's bad to be a pirate. It's just that there are lots of pirates, and that's how some people make their living, like asking, are you a used car salesman? Not exactly respectable, but still, people do it. So are you a pirate? Yes. We're not pirates, no, and I am great Odysseus, and we ask you by the favor that Zeus has, that the guests are to be shown hospitality, to treat us well. I don't care about Zeus at all, says Polyphemus. He has rolled a great stone before the door, and then, having milked with tender care his little flock, he then takes up two of Odysseus' comrades and gobbles them down whole. Oh, the morning comes. What are we going to do? Polyphemus takes his flock out and rolls the stone in front of the door of the cave again. And here is a real place for a man of many wiles. Because you can't get out now, and if you were to kill Polyphemus while he slept, with that huge stone there, which no 10 men could lift, how could you get out? And so Odysseus ponders it. And in the night, as Polyphemus dines upon two more of the colleagues of Odysseus, Odysseus brings him some magnificent wine. Polyphemus drinks it and says, what's your name after all? And Odysseus, does he say Odysseus? No. You have an ID number? No. He says, my name is No Man. No Man, all right? Well, I tell you what, No Man, this wine is so good, better than anything we have on our island, that I'm going to give you a great gift. Now, Odysseus has a little greedy side to him, and he immediately asks, well, what is it? And I will eat you last of all. There they are. But in the night, his wiles do not fail him. Odysseus takes a great steak. They carve it to a sharp point, burn it in the ash until it is hard and ready, and then with it red hot, plunge it into the single eye of the Cyclops, for he has only one eye, and drive it deep down, and it bubbles up with his blood. And he is up screaming and yelling, shouting out, so that the other Cyclops hear him on other parts of the island. And they say, who is harming you, Polyphemus? And Polyphemus says, no man is harming me. They say, well, then why are you yelling? No man is harming you, so what? They go back to sleep. And so, in the morning, his little sheep have to go out, and so he rolls away the stone, but feels them as they go out. He's blind now. And again, Odysseus has seen the way. He ties 3 of the sheep together, and each of his men hang under them and get away. Now, he would not be a hero in the age of the Trojan War if a little bit of vengeance wasn't in Odysseus. And he can't stop himself as they are rowing away from shouting, "You know who did this to you, Polyphemus, you Cyclops? It is Odysseus, the hero of Troy." And a great a stone is tossed out at them. Their ship is nearly capsized, but they get away. But this wonderful story of Odysseus in the cave of Polyphemus shows him for the figure that the Greeks so admired. The man who can get through any situation, who knows when to lie, who knows when to take action, who knows when to wait. But the journey has just begun. An end seems in sight when they arrive at this fairy tale island ruled over by the king of the winds, rising up out of the ocean, bobbing with no fixed place to it, surrounded by magnificent walls. And the king of the winds is so taken with Odysseus that he binds up all the storm winds and puts them in great bags and places them on a raft for Odysseus and his men. But there's another side to never telling the truth. And his men know Odysseus well enough not to believe him. And so they are sailing along and they ask, "What's in those bags?" And Odysseus says, "Nothing about these winds." Winds tied up in bags? No, there's nothing. So while he is asleep, almost at his home of Ithaca again, they open them up. And the winds drive them away again. So you almost get there, but not quite. And now, another land of savage giants, the Lastrygonians. And they harpoon Odysseus' men as though they were fishes, all but destroying, except for one ship. Until finally, once again, sailing away, Odysseus comes to the island of Circe. Again, it is prudence. He sends some of his men inland to carry out a mission of reconnaissance. They don't come back, and he goes himself, but warned by the gods. Because you see, Odysseus is throughout this beloved of Athena. She steps in again and again as a personal savior for him. She warns him what's going to happen, and through the medium of the god Hermes, and he gets to the place of the witch Circe and finds that she is able to turn men into animals, and she has turned his men into little pigs. And they come up to him. They can't talk, but they sniff him and kind of cuddle around him. And finally he goes into her home, and she offers him this drink that will turn him into a swine. Even though she's a woman, he pulls his dagger upon her, threatens to kill her, and then, having made her turn his men back into real humans, goes to bed with her. While Penelope is supposed to be dutiful, Odysseus is not. And she is one more of his conquest, and she now gives him the information he needs, where he must go. And it is depressing information. He must go down into the underworld, and there find out from the dead, from the ghost of those who have departed, how he is to get back home. And so, with his one remaining ship, he sails really to the far ends, to the great ocean that surrounds the world. And there dutifully carries out the proper rites. If you observe, Odysseus is faithful to the religion and faithful to the specified sacrifices of the gods and goddesses. He is pious, and that is one of his most important virtues. And so the ghosts appear. They want blood. They want to drink blood. And he has to hold them back by the sword until he can find the information he needs. And again, Tiresias, the ancient blind soothsayer that we know from plays like Oedipus the King, talks to Odysseus and says, yes, you will get home if you do the following, but even when you are there, there is no end to your troubles. You will have to walk all the way inland carrying an oar upon your shoulder. Till you meet somebody who says, what is that thing on your shoulder? That far must you go from the sea. And in Greece, where nowhere is very far from the sea, it would be a daunting task. But again, Odysseus does not give up. He meets with the shades of those who have gone before, like Achilles, who ask, how is my son doing? Your son Neoptolemus is a mighty warrior. He fought and took Troy with never a scratch upon him. And Achilles says, how I long to be in the world above. It is better to be a slave toiling in the world of the living than to be king of the dead. And then Agamemnon. The story of Agamemnon's return is a leitmotif in the Odyssey. It meets us at the very beginning of the story, where Zeus complains and says, why do mortals say that we bring troubles upon them? They bring troubles upon themselves. Look at Agamemnon. He comes home in glory, and his wife murders him, his wife and her lover. And again, here in the underworld, Agamemnon talks to Odysseus about his sad fate. I came home, and they lured me into the palace. I was in the bathtub, and they spread a net around me, and they struck me down. They killed me in my own home. And the theme, of course, is the treacherous wife Clytemnestra as the foil to the dutiful Penelope. But perhaps a wife is but the reflection of the husband. For the gross outrages, the arrogance that marks an Agamemnon is never part of the way of Odysseus. So his wife is prudent and dutiful. His own mother is there in the underworld, and one of the most touching scenes, again, Homer's ability to capture the emotional reality. Odysseus says, why are you dead, Mom? And she says, I died just for longing about you and your sweet ways. What a mother's statement. And now, knowing that more trouble lies ahead, he goes back to the island of Circe. Now, once again, he can stay on this island with this beautiful nymph. But he chooses not to. He doesn't know what is in store for him at home. But he sails on, even though the way is going to be difficult. He must sail past the sirens, these creatures with magnificent voices that lure men to their death. Now again, Odysseus likes adventure. He's avaricious, likes adventure, and he wants to hear them. So he stuffs the ears of his men with wax and has them tie him to the mast of the ship. He begs to be freed, but is kept there and hears the beautiful voices of the sirens. Past Scylla and Charybdis, these savage monsters that rip most of the rest of his men from the ship. And then finally, to rest on the island of the sun god. Now there's one thing his men must not do, and that is eat the cattle of the sun god. Now they have plenty of provisions at the start, but the gods test Odysseus one more time. For it is almost as though this most beloved by the gods also must be tested most. And so the winds don't blow. The provisions run out. And his men, despite his orders, slaughter and eat the magnificent cattle of the sun god. Now they know they've done something bad at the very start because the very skins of the creatures begin to crawl and moan. But the deed has been done. And when the winds do begin to blow again, a terrible storm comes up, drowns the rest of them, and only Odysseus survives, washed up on the island of Calypso. Now his audience has been hanging on every word of this story there in Phthia. But the queen raises her hand and says, that is a magnificent story. But the king and queen both say, we know that you are such a man of honor, Odysseus, that you wouldn't just come here and entertain us to win our goodwill with a bunch of lies. It's almost as though Homer is signposting us. Don't look too hard for the land of the Cyclops. Don't take a travel tour based on going in the wake of Odysseus. Maybe none of this ever happened. For Odysseus is a man who knows how to tell many lies and to tell them well. But we like the story so much that we're going to send you back home. Once again, he can stay. Be greatly honored. The king of the Phaeacians is much taken with Odysseus, and Nausicaa, his beautiful daughter, wants him to stay. But think of me sometime, he says to Nausicaa, but I am going home. And finally, in the ship of the Phaeacians, he arrives home at Ithaca, asleep. Right there, very beginning of book 13, Homer tells us what his theme is. For Odysseus is put down by the Phaeacians in this cave. It is a cave that Homer tells us has magnificent looms, which you make cloth upon, made of stone, that the bees gather their honey there, and that there are two entrances, one for mortals, one for the gods. It is an allegory for life. The bees are in antiquity both mortal and divine. They gather their honey partly from heaven and partly from earth. And the looms are made of stone, endure forever. We are born as mortals, we must die. But for the gods there is everlasting life. And life is but a journey. And Odysseus has finally found his harbor, his cave of safety. But even at this moment, he doesn't give up his cautiousness. A young man approaches him and asks him a question, and who are you? And Odysseus says, what is this countryside? I can't recognize it. And the young man says, it is Ithaca. And Odysseus says, oh, fine. And then the young man says, who are you? He says, I'm a Cretan, and I have been going through all these adventures. I'm a Cretan. Now again, to Homer's audience, that's an immediate sign that it's a lie. All Cretans are liars. I was told this by a Cretan. It's a famous paradox. And so the young man suddenly turns out to be Athena and says, you know, you can never tell the truth, can you? You lie all the time. Well, it's a good idea. And I tell you what, if you're ever going to get home in safety, you're going to have to lie again. And so Odysseus does not immediately go back to his palace and announce himself. By a very careful set of stratagems, he appears before his palace as an old beggar, and there sees what the situation is, sees the greedy nobles partaking of his food, sees that his wife is faithful to him, but on the verge of thinking about marrying. And then, in that hall, as the audience that was listening to Homer had so long waited, he takes his vengeance. Vengeance is what makes grief bearable, said a Greek poet. And Odysseus takes his vengeance, with his son standing beside him, upon those who have wronged him, slashing them with his sword, bashing them with his battle axe, driving them through with his bow and arrow. For none of them could master the great bow of Odysseus but himself. That was the test that his wife had laid out for them. And even takes the servant girls who have slept with the evil suitors and wrings their necks like chickens. And it is only when his vengeance has been taken that he reveals himself to his wife. He doesn't even trust his wife to let her know ahead of time. And she doesn't recognize him. Only his faithful old dog has recognized him, Argus, who wiggles his tail and then dies. This grand story most certainly reflects historical reality, the turbulent days that followed the collapse of Troy, known to us from the records of the Hittites as well as from Egyptian records. Turbulent days that saw the Israelites move into the land of Canaan. But it is not just a historical memory. It is a glorious poem, a masterpiece of creative energy. And if scholars today, as they have for 200 years, still debate, was there a Homer? Did one person write the Iliad, another write the Odyssey? Are they a collection of poems put together by later editors? I say, sit down and read those two masterpieces. The Iliad, a poet at his absolute peak, writing of war and honor. And then, some years later, perhaps 25 years later, sitting down, older, wiser, knowing what life is, and telling you the story of Odysseus, the man who survived it all. Well, we leave the world of Troy, and in our next lecture, emerge upon the scene of historical Greece.